My name is Riya Gulati, and I welcome you all to our webinar on setting the 2021 Audit Committee agenda. We thank and acknowledge the support of the Bahrain Internal Auditors Association, the Institute of Internal Auditors Kuwait, the Institute of Internal Auditors Oman, UAE Internal Auditors Association, and Accountants and Auditors Association UAE in partnering with us for this session. With over 150 participants joining the session, it is indeed encouraging for us to host this program. We have attendees from across the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, Oman, India, Pakistan, Egypt, Jordan, and many other countries, covering a diverse range of industries and markets. We are grateful to all of you for making the time to be here and looking forward to a great forum. During this session, we'll be discussing the significant issues that we believe warrant audit committee's attention at most companies and organizations. Before we proceed, I'd like to share some housekeeping tips. All attendee microphones will remain on mute during the session. You'll notice that there is a question and answer functionality on the side panel where you can post questions and share your perspectives. We'll try to address your questions during the session. You'll also see polls being added to the sidebar. Please respond to these as the panelists are speaking, and we'll present the findings during the session. We're recording today's webinar, and we'll make the recording available to all the attendees. We'll be providing 1 CP credit, courtesy UAE IIA, to all the participants. On today's panel, we have Brian Christensen, Abdul Qadir Ubaid Ali, Noor Rehman Abid, and Dr. Khalid Al-Fadaga. Brian is a member of Protivity's executive leadership team and is the firm's internal audit and financial advisory solutions global leader. He has more than 30 years of experience helping clients increase the value of their internal audit function. As a founding managing director of Protivity at its formation in 2002, Brian has held various leadership roles in the firm's solution and operating group. Abdul Qadir is the Chief Executive Officer of Smart World UAE and Chairman of the Board of Internal Auditors Association UAE. He was a winner of the prestigious Kano Medal Excellence Catalyst for the year 2011 and IDEA's UK Fellowship Award 2012. He's the first UAE national recipient of the prestigious Wilfred Thesiger Award and a jury member for the Dubai Quality Award and Sheikh Khalifa Excellence Award. Noor is a fellow chartered accountant from the Institute of Chartered Accountants in England and Wales. He has more than 35 years of experience in the profession across Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. He spent 33 years with Ernst & Young, joining them in 1979 and rising to become an office managing partner, and then the assurance leader for the MENA region. Dr. Khalid is the former Chief Audit Executive and Board Audit Committee Secretary at Saudi Aramco, who retired in 2015. Since then, he has been serving as an independent member of several boards and subcommittees, such as chair and member of Audit and Risk Committees at Saudi Tabreez, SABIC, STC, Aquapar, Bupa Arabia, FIMACO, and Board Risk Committee member at the Public Investment Fund, PIF. He also attended an executive program at Harvard Business School and others on leadership, finance, and corporate governance. A very warm welcome to all our panelists. We'll be having a short presentation by Brian on setting the 2021 Audit Committee agenda, followed by the panel discussion. I'd request Brian to start the session. Over to you, Brian.
Thank you, Ria. It is my extreme pleasure to be with all of you this afternoon, and especially to be the moderator of what is going to be an outstanding panel. The only thing that would bring me greater pleasure is if I could be with all of you in your homes, and I hope you are safe and your families are healthy and well during these unprecedented times. One of the great pleasures I get in my role within my firm is working across the globe with executives and boards of directors and audit committees on a number of important topics. We like to begin each year by reflecting upon what is the audit committee agenda. And I think the events of the pandemic of 2020 that we continue to experience and the impacts that we've seen on businesses and organizations have been traumatic and really set a tone of opportunity and challenge that we've never seen before. Today, what we'd like to do is walk through some of those observations and things that we've gathered from a number of data points from our surveys, from our discussions with people like yourself, and really at the very end of this, tee it up to our panelists to have a robust conversation. And I know in the preparation for today, we've got a very engaging audience. And again, I am humbled to be the moderator and to work with them. So let's jump into it. So from the standpoint, Ria, if we can go to the next slide, what we're looking at is really the opportunity of what is the mandate for audit committees. As we've gone in and started 2021, we can categorize these amongst kind of four areas. The first broad group is really talk about the enterprise risk, process risk, and technology risks that face organizations. We also talk about the financial reporting. And so we're going to talk about the change in that risk landscape. And I think none of us would have anticipated a little over a year ago that we'd probably be still operating in the mode that we are today. We're also going to talk about resiliency. That's the term that we are seeing more and more in boardrooms around how organizations can respond, how management, boards, and members of the audit community can really work together and collaborate on how to apply and impact change. And then talking about the role of the CFO as a strategic partner in addressing important risks. Cyber, privacy, and other risks continue to remain very robust in this current environment. And then the opportunity for chief audit executives. Many of our members on the call today come from that community. I, like you, serve in some board and leadership positions within the Institute for Internal Auditors, and I'm glad many of you from the Middle East are joining us today, and we'll talk about that. Then lastly, we're going to talk about some of the financial reporting issues and what the impact of those are. So let's jump into our presentation. When we start talking about the enterprise process and technology risk, there are several things that really come to mind. And so the first of these, Ria, if you can toggle ahead to slide 8, please. We talk about the shifts in the risk landscape to establish the appropriate business context. As I mentioned previously, we can all probably transpose ourselves where we were a little over a year ago when the impacts of COVID-19 were a wake-up call to us. We've talked about and have learned through our careers of managing risk and the implications upon the business. But I think many of us never really understood or appreciated the impacts of what that could take. I, like you, serve in a number of areas and have spent much of my career in the airline industry. It's one of the areas and industries that has been dramatically impacted, along with other parts of the hospitality. As business leaders, we've been relegated to our homes, working remotely, and the impacts there have been very steep, and we're starting to see early signs of recovery. But we're going to talk about what are those risks? How have people responded? And so the next slide, we're going to talk here a little bit also about the role of the CFO and the finance function around resiliency. I know, talking with audit leaders and audit committees around the globe, the terms historically we've talked about are business continuity management, things of that nature. Can we keep the hot sites up? Can we keep the IT centers working effectively? We're seeing that there has been a large change and shift in talking about resiliency in many areas of how we can keep our systems, processes, and supply chains. And I think even a recent reminder across the globe, the recent incident in the Suez Canal had people talking about supply chain in a different way and what the impacts have been on various markets, including oil and things of that nature. So our next slide, please. So what does this mean for the audit committee? There are several questions that audit committee members should be asking, and management and auditors should be prepared to respond to. How effective has the financial reporting process been when our employees are working remotely? Did we learn from what did we learn from our people and our processes? From my experience, we've seen a vast embrace of the remote workforce, and candidly, in prepping with some of our panelists today, we've seen that that's probably gone more smoothly than any of us would have ever imagined. But this is a new paradigm, and what does that mean? And I think we all need to consider and ask those questions. What skills did our people develop, and what processes were redesigned, and what worked and what didn't? We need to ask these critical questions, and how can we back up systems and processes to the effective nature of what we need to do? Are there other disruptions that are taking place? I think we're seeing tremendous advances in technology in the last year, working remotely in manners like this, but our ability to allow members of our workforce to access remote databases, to work collaboratively around the globe and share real-time information. And of course, number 3 on this list here is, what about the technology and tools? I think it would be hard to imagine we could operate in the fashion we are today just a few years ago, as we've tilted up such things as Teams, and have worked in environments with Zoom and things of that nature. But more importantly, the access to Power BI or other powerful tools that give all of us access and sharing of information. What is the impact of this as we go forward? And what about the security implications? Have we seen much of this? And we'll talk about that with our panelists here in a little bit. Due to this disruption in 2020, how do we associate the related risks, right? One of the things that I'm seeing within audit committees and boards is a discussion around culture. How are our people handling the remote work? We're seeing people that maybe have situations that don't avail themselves. As an example, I was on a recent conversation where I know members of our New York office are eager to get back to the office, despite the fact that COVID is still requiring the mandates to the lockdown. But as you can imagine, if you're in a dense urban area, traveling on mass transit, going up elevators, working in a very tight quarters is still an important ramification. So I think many of the things that we anticipate are going to remain. And these are things that workforces and boards need to consider as we go forward. So our next slide, please, Ria. So when we look at some of the broader risks, we need to encourage the CFO to function as a strategic partner in addressing cybersecurity, privacy, and other key matters. What we see is the bad culprits within the technology community continue to get more creative and are really putting forward things in fashions we've never seen. You add into it cryptocurrencies, other aspects of business that are really arising, and this presents new and unique challenges. And the audit committee can work collaboratively with the CFO in addressing these in the executive session, or really relying upon the auditors in a partnership to identify where we go forward. So next slide, please. So one of the questions that we need to ask is the finance function contributing as a strategic partner in enhancing the role in cybersecurity? This may be something that many of us haven't thought about in the past, but is really a critical integration. We're seeing more and more the cross of functions within organizations, the IT organization, working with finance, working with operations, and they need to partner and ask that. And the opportunity for the finance function and the CFO to fill that role is critical from a strategic standpoint. And what about addressing internal customers, increasing expectations for more dynamic financial analysis and insight? I know you'll hear from one of our panelists talking about the expectation of more real-time information, more responsiveness. We may not be just accustomed to a quarterly or monthly cycle. What's happening on a daily and weekly basis? And then lastly, how is the CFO addressing talent and skills within this area? I know when we look at a global workforce, the unemployment rate for finance and accounting professionals in particular is very low. And in a recent survey I've seen this past week in North America in the Wall Street Journal said that 1 in 4 employees in this sector is contemplating a workforce change within the next year. Despite the fact we've been home, people have been complacent and unwilling to explore new things during a pandemic. And what does that mean to the institutional knowledge of key people within your organization? These are critical questions. So let's take and talk a little bit about what this means from the CAE standpoint. The internal auditor, and like I like to refer to it, the auditor of the future or next gen, has a tremendous opportunity. and I know it's something as the president of the IIA Foundation, we're looking at this globally. The opportunity before the audit committee for internal audit is to enhance that value proposition. How do we enhance? How do we look forward? How do we work prospectively? I mentioned culture earlier. We're looking as an organization, as internal auditors are looking at organizations rather, what is the culture? How are people's attitudes? Are there opportunities to continue to advance? Because the triad of people, process, and technology is critical. And without mentally strong personnel, there are opportunities. And I think the chief auditor and his or her team has a tremendous opportunity to be a problem solver as someone that works across all the verticals within the organization. So what does this mean for all of us? Audit committee should really talk about, what are the expectations of the CAA to lead and go forward? I've seen many cases where the audit agenda has been set aside, and auditors, because of their skills and abilities, have been asked to go into new areas. I mentioned supply chain earlier. I've talked about culture. There are many on that docket. Is the CAA talking and communicating a vision, and is it strategically effective? Are you aligned across the organization? We're seen as, like I refer to, old school internal audit is no longer effective going forward. Are you bringing those tools, technologies, dynamic reporting, and the ability to serve around the areas of governance, methodology, and technology? Another area is the CAA can be a critical link for audit committees to discuss strategic risks, dynamic risk assessments, and what are they hearing or seeing, and working collaboratively with audit committees. Another area is talking about the use of agile methodologies, right? The auditor of the past would spend a tremendous amount of time going through the procedures and protocol. The ability and need to be agile and responsive to needs requires a dynamic ability to assess, identify, report, and move forward. And then the last couple here is really the integration of technology, particularly around robotic process automation or artificial intelligence, the ability to apply bots in the cloud, whether it's AWS or Azure, and have those monitoring 24/7. I like to refer to this as the holy grail of opportunity within the audit profession, because the robots never ask for a raise, they never get tired, they never ask for a day off. But we can work in an analyst role to understand the information that they're gathering and respond to it in real time. And then lastly, does the audit committee give the CAA sufficient time to address these matters? In many instances, when we assess and look at audit functions, they remain perfunctory in their nature. But the opportunity to work collaboratively with all the people is a tremendous opportunity today. So our next slide, please. So when we look at financial reporting issues, there are a couple areas here as well that we need to contemplate. The first of these, does the company's decisions adjust to operations during the pandemic? And what are the implications here? We've seen many industries dramatically impacted. What has been that response? Did they sit idly by? Did they engage? And I think in the preparation, as I've indicated earlier, many of our panelists talk about the robust nature of what they seek and what they desire in terms of responding and guiding forward. Another area is our ability to assess the COVID impacts on financial reporting. Various regulatory bodies or private organizations are all looking at what are the implications and what does that mean to the financial statements. Certain industries, as I mentioned, the hospitality is assessing and describing, will they ever come back? Will business travel return to the levels it once did? This is a new paradigm that we're experiencing, and I personally look forward to the day that I can visit many of my friends that are on the call here today, or travel and get back to our old ways. But I think the reality is there is a new paradigm. And what does that mean for organizations? Every organization's been impacted in one way or another, and that has financial ramifications. And lastly, looking at number 7, the impact of near-term and long-term impacts on the internal control environment. These changes have thrust upon us vast change in the day-to-day process. What does this mean? As I mentioned earlier as well, change potentially is afoot with personnel. the ability to respond and replace personnel, and what are the implications during these difficult times, is important to consider in the financial reporting around the financial reporting of the controls. So what do these mean in terms of questions for audit committees to consider? Number one is, has management consulted with legal counsel to ensure that the company remains in compliance with applicable laws and privacy rules? I know there's lots of discussions, as an example, about the possibility of a vaccine passport. Various cultures and government responses around privacy are going to have a major impact on what this means and our ability to go forward, just as an example. What are the other control aspects that have seen significant changes? During this process of lockdown, we've seen a variety of reentry. I know as someone that oversees a global workforce, the impacts of the pandemic still remain very vast. We're seeing various levels. I know in North America, there's more optimism than we've seen in recent months as the vaccine gets rolled out wildly, or rolled out and people wildly want to embrace the ways of the past. Yet we're seeing in parts of the EU, in South Africa, South America, and other parts of the globe, a resurgence in maybe a fourth wave. And so what are these impacts going to have on us going forward? And lastly, what about the physical locations? I know looking at the Wall Street Journal today, there was a large article about the impacts of what this is going to mean on real estate and how people respond. And what about the compliance and fraud risk? Many internal control implications from what we have. And so as we can see, we have a very dynamic environment that we're working in. And another area that is just on the radar to point out is keeping an eye on the ESG developments. Markets are evaluating and assessing the importance of ESG, and we're seeing it to become a very robust conversation. And for my work with organizations, maybe including some of you on this call today, I think many of the leading ESG areas are coming from parts of the Middle East, and it's very encouraging to see where we're at. The next item within ESG, under number 2, in the view of the current environment, companies may want to address such areas as diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? There's been a lot of discussion around the E aspect of ESG, but the social aspect is also important as we look around the globe at our inclusivity of our colleagues and friends. And lastly, the audit committee should review these new and expanded disclosures with developments that are occurring at the company. It seems like a day does not go by where some aspect of ESG crosses many executives' desks, and we need to be prepared to respond accordingly. So in conclusion, 2020 has been a year of opportunity for audit committees to support key players. It's not been just the repeat of past process. So as we go forward, the business environment continues to present a disruptive challenge. I think it's a wake-up call to many of us that the world that we recall of the past is not the world that we go forward. And we as financial executives and leaders, whether it's at board levels, C-suite, audit, or financial roles, have an opportunity and a challenge to really have a long-term memory and respond to things in a fashion we haven't, particularly around the ability to be resilient and agile in our response. And so with that, I really look forward to engaging our panelists. We have an outstanding group of panelists, as Ria introduced, and we've got a number of great questions. And I thought maybe what we could do is begin with our panelists, is just open it up for the discussion with them around the whole concept of the risk profile update. And in the comments that I have just shared, and from their perspective, disruption in the marketplace, it makes it difficult for management teams to sustain organizations. What are the values? What are some of the strategic and operational plans that have been implemented? And what I'd like to do is, maybe even begin with a poll question. And if we can pull up that poll question, Ria, how often does your audit committee or board or management committee discuss emerging and disruptive risks and makes changes in the risk profile? And I think this is a good preamble as we begin our conversation. So I'd ask that you kind of vote there. We've got a few moments. And while we're looking for the poll responses to come in, maybe I'll open it up to our panelists. And I'm not sure if anyone would like to just talk about what the implications of the risk profile has been in the audit committee. And I will maybe ask each of you to make a brief comment on that, and then we'll continue on. So Noor, I see you kind of looking and nodding in your chair. Maybe I can call upon you to go first. Noor, I think you're on. We need to unmute.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Brian, for that excellent presentation. I think in terms of risks, anybody who says that risks have not changed or we are not living in a different world is probably still asleep. I think things have changed dramatically. You spoke earlier about business continuity management, and we had all heard of Black Swan event. I think what we went through in 2020 was perhaps the blackest swan we've ever seen. And that really necessitated recognition of new risks, new challenges, and as you quite rightly put up at the start of your presentation, opportunities. And I think those audit committees that faced these opportunities with open mind and open heart did well. And those audit committees that thought that we can continue business as usual and perhaps this is a temporary phenomena and this will go away, I think have paid a price and will perhaps now wake up and face these new challenges. So in my view, the risks have definitely changed. The audit committees have not reacted as fast or as comprehensively as they should have, but we are getting there slowly but surely. And I think the opportunities are endless. So those are my brief comments on this particular point.
Yeah, thank you, Noor. I'm in my home office, like many of us, and I could turn around. One of my favorite books behind my shoulder is The Black Swan. And I think that's a great reminder that while we think things are unique in this environment, they are part of what we see day to day. So Khalid, I see you're up and ready. Do you want to make some comments to begin here?
Yes, Brian, thank you very much. Very insightful presentation, and I definitely second what Mr. Noor has said about the event, this drastic event. I like always to look at and study when an event happened, do a post-analysis, and I think we are now in an ideal situation to do that. What we have learned, in fact, about the COVID crisis is that how much we don't know about risk management. If you think about it, every professional, and I actually do challenge in boards and subcommittees, the professionals that come and present, these different scenarios. Because if you take a snapshot in the fourth quarter of 2019, everyone missed the mark. No one ever predicted a scale of event in the way that we went through in 2020. The only thing that I saw in there were some heat maps that would have maybe an account for maybe an environmental disaster. That's the closest thing we probably seen. So that's number one. So what is really the thing that we saw in 2020? Board audit committees actually have been the most flexible because they don't know what to do. They actually gave full delegation to the chief audit executive to adjust the plan. If some of the traditional thinking that we had in the past is that, oh no, the plan should be the plan, and then only we give you 10%. I think that has gone out of the window. Chief audit executives that actually stepped in and as they say, saved the day, provided alternatives for the original audit plan that was approved for 2020. So I think we at least now broke this myth about rigidness and not having flexibility. So the key one is flexibility. So no doubt in my mind. Financial resilience. You see, we all go through we all go through these business analysis and say, oh no, really need to keep things lean and mean. Companies who were lean and mean suffered the most. In a way, there was a reward for some inefficiency where you have some retained earnings, some deep pockets that you can do some let's say, contingencies. Many companies really suffered and had to restructure their financing through maybe debt, through equity, and it was very difficult to find also. So I mean, this is also a very important lesson that we learned. So I think going to the future, we want to test that. And my suggestion in here, and that was something that I actually did in several of these board or subcommittees, is that to do scenario planning, extreme scenario planning, and or the term I use is stress test. You stress test the event. Anything that comes and show you linear extrapolation of events, look at the extremes. So I think that really opened our eyes about there are possibilities in here. Some of these strategic risks can hit you really hard and fast without you knowing. The last point I like to make is that it's about cybersecurity. In the beginning of 2020, no doubt that cybersecurity became the top risk, and everyone actually said, well, cyber. To me, it was it's like there is a fear about the unknown. We really don't know. But as we went through, if you analyze what has happened, right now, my anxiety about cybersecurity is probably more tempered now. Why? Because we went through a drastic event. No, in reality, there were no drastic events that relates to cybersecurity or breaches. For some reason, I think our cybersecurity professionals and the cybersecurity system somehow stood the test of time. However, that doesn't say that you ignore it, but I think there was a little bit of a hype in the beginning because people didn't know what to expect, because you have remote working, you have all this data breach potential, financial reporting, you have sensitive information. What I saw that really helped a lot, especially in Saudi Arabia, and I'm sure in some of the countries, is that the regulators stepped in and immediately enforced guidelines on remote work. That really helped us a lot in Saudi Arabia, at least, to actually bring the systems to the point where at least mitigate some of these fears or the potential problems. Not to say this is not important. It will not be my number one for 2021. It'd probably be in the top 5, probably a little bit lower. That would be my suggestion.
Yeah, Khalid, great perspective, and we're going to talk a little bit more about cybersecurity here in a moment. And Abdul Qadir, we're really glad to have you on. I think as an executive and as an audit professional with great esteem in our profession, Khalid was talking, as Nuar was talking as well, about the changes, and I'm interested in your perspective. Right, we're talking about agile auditors, throwing out audit plans, doing things, maybe even participating in tabletop exercises. But I'd be interested in your perspective if you could share it with our audience. Abdul Qadir, you're on mute there.
Okay. No, thanks a lot, Brian. Really, as I said, I was a chief audit executive for 10 years. And then actually I moved into an executive role. I've been working as an executive in the last almost 7 years. And at the same time being still on different committees, including the audit committee. So I will trying to tie it from a high level way and to trying to say, yes, I do agree with you that it's a wake up call. Probably the best thing that happened to the auditors is COVID. From that point of view, we always look at things from a positive point of view. Yes, the whole world almost, stopped, as you said, indicated. If you were one of the unfortunate ones working in the airlines or working in the entertainment or hotel, actually you really faced a lot of challenges because there's no business, everything is stopped. Probably the areas that actually there were some businesses that actually boomed, and a lot of it is to do with IT. People who worked in IT and were able to trying to take advantage of that did work. And of course, if you were in the sanitization business, which we're not going to go in there, that was really the best thing. To me, I look at that and I'd like to try and use three words. And what I'm saying is these are the three lessons I've actually learned being as a chief audit executive. And I think those three words would probably be aligned even during our time right now. The first of those words is an alignment. There is always a need for an alignment during COVID or not during COVID between the chief audit executive and the audit committee, especially with the chair of the audit committee. It's so involvement, and that alignment requires the second word, which is effective communication, to make sure that there is effective communication between the two going down along with the management. And that does not stop because there has to be an element of involvement, because, you know, and I've seen it, and I can talk from speaking to chief audit executives who I've seen, some who actually lost half of their department during the pandemic because there was nothing to be done, and people, you know, were actually let go because of the crisis. Yet, I have seen some audit department who actually enhanced their number of people. And when I asked them, how did you really manage as a chief audit executive during this time when everybody's cutting down budget to be able to convince the audit committee and to make sure you can have more manpower? Not to say that during this unfortunate time, there was a lot of auditors available at a very, 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 you know, attractive prices. But if the relationship between the chief audit executive and the chair of the audit committee is in sync, and I do not mean in sync during these 4 or 6 or 8 times you're talking about at the audit committee, because that is a calendar event that happens. It should happen prior and after the audit committee. That sinks in there, that the chair of the audit committee really understand the situation in there. And some of the challenges that I have seen within my audit committee, if that alignment is not there, because as you said, Brian, almost 99% of the audit plan were thrown out of the door. Nobody had thought that at one time we're going to have this. Therefore, the audit plan, which was on a piece of paper put, is no longer valid. So people had to actually use the other side of the auditors, which is the consultancy. And I've seen auditors go down to the floor, become the strategic partner with management, roll their sleeves, and become, I don't want to say executive, almost at the executive to save the organization, especially internal auditors. And I felt, you know, and I've seen that in some of the organizations, those organizations, you could see that the role of the audit has not only changed, everybody respected the auditors a lot, because who would actually think of this? I also, you know, I don't want to take a lot of time, but, you know, for the auditors in general, some of the auditors felt that this time they realized what they were not able to do before. Some of the time to actually enhance their ability to become digital. Because imagine if the whole workforce is working from home. And, you know, some organization, you know, at the C-suite, you can see that that's okay. The C-suite can handle being not in the office, and the meeting can actually produce. But lower in the organization, when you really require those people and they're all working from home, how would you know that they're actually working or actually not working? So there was a need for definitely the auditors to take the sixth sense and be adding value to the management to see how they can help make sure the work is effective, secure. And I don't want to go into cybersecurity because it was covered by Khalid. I think it is definitely, it's one of the biggest enablers. If COVID helped us to become more digital across every single organization, I think we should be glad that we took a year off. You know, of all the 100 years that you have in there, we took a year off to reconsider that an audit plan is no longer something that you're going to be looking at it every half a year, and he mentioned that poll question, which I was wondering, is anybody going to answer? It's no longer, it has to be relevant from week to week. And one of the things that I really find with successful organization is that when there was really effective communication from the audit department with the risk compliance and the external auditors. If that communication was there, the auditors had a chance to actually shine. I also would like to say that, yes, the days of long reports have gone and passed. No longer people going to be interested in looking at anything past 3 pages. They're looking at things that you not only can tell what happened, because people are not interested in what happened in the past. People are interested, can you help us forecast what's going to happen? As executive in the management, it's no use going and telling the management, whether it's the CFO or the CEO, something that he or she would know. Unless you can add something relevant and something that can help them and become the real consultant, I think you're going to lose your chair very soon. That's all I have to add.
Yeah, no, great perspectives from all our panelists. And I think, what you can see as audience members, we could probably go on for hours. It's a great perspective. We did have in our poll question some interesting, commentary that I would, add to supplement this conversation of, what are people doing? The overall answer was really people are still doing risk assessment on a quarterly basis. And I think, Abdul, you and other panelists talked about the need for being more responsive, more dynamic, right? And I think that is our opportunity. And as a leader in the profession, I believe we need to do more things. If you're not a panelist, I might ask if you could be on mute, please. We're going to go to our next poll question. And that next poll question, it has to do around cybersecurity. We touched on a number of things. And if you can respond, how well is your organization prepared for cyber threats? Is there a focus and funding on cybersecurity, and is the importance understood? We've heard from our panelists that maybe working remotely didn't avail to that. But I know you mentioned cyber earlier on, and maybe it's a good way to circle back to you. We talked about the state of flux and why maybe remote. We know cyber remains the number one area we're looking at, and so maybe some comments, Noor, from your perspective.
Thank you, Brian. Cyber security is, as Dr. Khalid mentioned, perhaps somewhat high, but remains a huge threat. It can cause financial loss. More importantly, it can cause reputational loss. And if you look at what has happened in the last couple of years, and particularly in the last 9 months since COVID set up, the incidence of cyber incidents has increased substantially. It is unbelievable that people are no longer breaking doors to rob institutions. They are breaking computers to rob them. And nobody is safe. No matter what you do, you are facing this risk. And I'm not sure how well the organizations are prepared for that. Some of them are obviously prepared very well, and some are not. But no matter what you do, there's always going to be a risk. So you need to be active, you need to be robust, and you need to be dynamic. It's not a one-time thing that you've dealt with it once. And I will say, if you are trying to assess the risk to your organization, please use the experts. Don't try and use the in-house IT experts or so-called in-house specialists, because really they haven't got a clue. What has been seen in the last 9 months is amazing tools and technology being used by these people who are venturing into computers, into networks, in all sorts of organizations, in central banks, in commercial banks, in hospitals, in Amazon, for God's sake, getting into their databases. So it has to be addressed. You need to set professionals. I'm a chairman of one institution, and we called one cybersecurity firm to look at our institution and how safe we are. And within minutes, he showed us live how many threats our organization was facing, including one particular organization set up a huge fake website for our institution with our logos, with our mission statements, with our value statements, and we didn't have a clue that this is going on in the background. So it's a real risk. It needs to be addressed. But my bottom line is use the experts, use people who know what you're doing, because this risk can ruin your organization financially and reputationally. So please don't undervalue it.
Yeah, no, that's great perspective. So let's take a look at the poll results. And, from a perspective of how well is the organization prepared, it's great to see that, well, it's an interesting paradox, right? It's equal between well-funded and not enough funding, right? So I think that's a paradox that's there. And Khalid, I think we've got a question from our audience that maybe you can comment on as well. From your experience as board members, the question that came in from our audience is, how are audit committees and boards engaging other parts? For example, the CIO or the CISA to help around cybersecurity, as important leaders have that responsibility. So maybe you can put that in the context of your role as a board member, how you engage not only finance and audit, but other key constituents that maybe audit committees have not historically spoken with.
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely an area that is evolving. The audit committee no longer just focus on audit, let's say, sphere. In fact, I have seen now more and more boards and subcommittees where you have now more collaborative work between the audit committee and the risk committee. In companies that you have audit committees and companies that have risk committee, in fact, we even institutionalize that to have at least once or twice, let's say, joint meetings between the audit committee and risk committee. This is an evolving, by the way, trend. As a result, I think as a result, again, the COVID is COVID, but there is sometimes blessing in disguise, and I find that to be a very, very important type of meeting, because you can actually start from the fundamentals, from how you assess the risks. And actually, there are questions that you can ask as an audit committee and between the risk committee. The risk committee can say, okay, how effective was the enterprise risk management system in providing you with a good input? I maintain a position that in a well-developed system, enterprise risk management system, actually the first beneficiary would be the chief audit executive and the audit committee, because if you have a well-developed dynamic, and I think like my friend Abu Ahmed mentioned, is that you have to have this dynamic risk assessment, continuous monitoring of strategic risk. If you have a system and an output from it, from an enterprise risk management that is dynamic, actually the chief audit executive don't have to do much in order to build an audit plan on it. You see, and then today we have already at least witnessed the fact that board audit committees are now more flexible and more in a mode of accepting flexible plans. So I think this is, to me, is a very important development, the fact that you have the two talking. The other thing also as an audit committee and risk committees, the COVID, the crisis is actually a typical crisis management. And we actually institutionalize let's say a weekly, even let's say a bi-monthly reporting on, with all the scenarios, stress testing, for example. What are the important things we watch? How many people are infected? Any plants that have been affected? Financial. What's your cash flow position? And this is now becoming more like across the board. It's not really just for the audit committee, but it's actually for the whole executive suite to really know, and all maybe the stakeholders to know. So I think it is something that these are trends that are evolving as a result of the going through this crisis.
Yeah, I think Dr. Khalid, you bring up a great point. We're seeing more risk committees evolving right within organizations, and audit committees have normally historically brought in a lot of those, but they've been IT related, they've been financial related, but now we're looking much more broadly. So I concur with our panelists. Cyber remains important, and looking at that. What I'd like to do now is go to our next poll question and segue into talking about internal audit. And I think Abdul Qadir, as we go through this, you'll be my first question here, because I think you've got a great perspective in your earlier comments of having both served as a chief audit executive and currently as an executive. You've got wonderful perspective. And so our poll question is your internal audit department effective in achieving appropriate risk coverage? Agile responses, new and emerging risks, efficient delivery of value-added insights regarding risk culture, risk management capabilities, yes, needs improvement, or no. I like Dr. Khalid. I may want to come back to you for a quote for our profession, because I've been an outspoken advocate, and Abdul Qadir talked about the fact that auditors need to be responsive, and I've many auditors, when we talk about the 3 lines model, right, of management sets the tone, there's the execution, and then the auditors are in the 3rd line. I've heard repeatedly and have been challenged in the past year around the globe that the auditor needs to roll up their sleeves, right? They can't be sitting idle. It's like showing up to a fire. If you're the first one there, you don't wait and say, well, I don't put the bucket on the fire to put it out, right? And I think Abdul Qadir, that's, sounds like your perspective as well of we need to do more, but there are tremendous opportunities. And so we're if you could answer that, and Abdul, if I could come to you and get your perspective, and from a question standpoint, how imperative do you think it is for the CAE to undertake transformation and innovation activities around internal audit? We talked about the plan, maybe tossing out the plan in years like we've had, but having served in the role as a chief audit executive and also as a CEO, your perspective here will be great.
Yes, thanks a lot, Brian. And as really, I'd like to repeat, and I'd like to echo when you talk about, a lot of the chief audit executive, when I speak with them, and when you talk about some of the risk, and one of the highest risks when it comes to something like security, cyber security, they're not fully aware of it because they don't understand it. And it's nothing wrong with it, because, if you look into, unless you have actually came up through the IT area to be the chief audit executive, you don't. Same thing also with respect to the audit committee. Some of the audit committees, when they are fully not aware because their background does not allow them, that is one of the biggest challenges. So to them, it is one of the risks which is there, and they don't know what to do with it because they don't know it, and they are going to be dependent. I do agree with Noor when he said, you need to bring in the expert. And it's just like, if I ask you, Brian, when was your last health checkup that you have done? We're supposed to be doing it every year, but a lot of us do not do it. It's just because people are afraid that something is going to be wrong with them. This particular thing, I just like to allude a little bit about the cybersecurity, because I believe in an organization. There are 2 things. A lot of organizations, if they've got $100 to spend, they spend $80 or maybe $90 on putting in fireworks and stuff, bringing expert. But they don't spend enough on the culture of security in the organization, which is more important. And part of that is training everyone around what not to do in these cases. And if people actually take that as a proactive, it will help. Going back to your question about really whether we as auditors, we need to wake up. Gone the days that you are going to be sitting there. Most audit committees are shuffling. They're saying, no, I need more people who are actually IT savvy, because everything is going in that direction. I do not, with all respect to finance, people are looking at that. That is becoming an RPA kind of work. You need people coming up with different talent to make sure they can help. Everybody's going online. I mean, I don't want to try it, but on 12/12/21, government of Dubai is going paperless, which means there is not a single piece of paper on any of the government entities in there. Now, that tells you it's not about just going paperless. It's going is going to be cashless. Auditors who actually do not understand what's really happening around them, they are out of a job. And I do agree with what Noor said. You need to bring some expert from that area. But the beauty today is there's a lot of experts. You, as internal auditor, do not need to have 20, 30 people in there. Today, audit can be done while you're sitting in here from somebody who's actually in South Africa or somebody in the US who has that talent. You need somebody to understand what talent we need, get them from around the globe, because even today, people are hiring people and they are from different places. So I think we need, as auditors, to learn that it is time. If we think of doing the same job, we are no longer in existence. Full stop. Thank you.
Well, I think that's a great perspective. And, just commenting on our poll, our respondents seem to agree, right? 54% say we need improvement. And what I'd like to do is offer our audience 2 data points, all right? I've mentioned the work that I work with many of you, maybe on various committees within the IIA. We've released within the last few months our competency framework looking forward. And I think, Abdul Qadar, as you talk about, the expectations are very different. And I would encourage all of you to understand the 4 pillars, that you need to be communicative, that you need to be an analyst, you need to pull in resources, right? And Dr. Khalid's comment that I want to use and maybe come back to is, if you are good at having good dynamic risk assessment, your job becomes easier, right? No one ever talks in that fashion. And I'm hopeful that all of you, your job will become easier when you do that. So those are great perspectives. And one more thing is, we are soon to release a global survey. We're probably 2 weeks away within Protivity, where we've surveyed chief audit executives around the globe of where they see themselves on the digital maturation curve. 80% say they are behind. That is our challenge and opportunity, right? If you respond to that, if you're on the front edge, can take that to your stakeholders, you are going to have a bright and great opportunity. So we've got a little more time left, and I'm going to go into one more question. And this one is really going to, I'm going to talk about ESG. So the team, I'm going to skip question 4 on financial reporting for the few minutes that we've got left, because ESG is an important area, and I think it's one that my experience, the Middle East is doing some great things, and so I want to make sure we get that. And so the whole question is, with the new trend of ESG being considered in the MENA region, how ready are you for incorporating this into your prospective strategy? And so you can see that already implementing, we'll consider in 1 to 2 years, we'll consider in a 2-year strategy. And so I think, this is an important part. It ties into financial reporting, the aspects here. And I'm not sure who would like to go first on this one. Dr. Khalid, can I maybe, pull on you to make some comments on this one?
It's a great question, by the way. That's, ESG. And I'm a firm believer that, when a concept comes in like this, ESG, you assess it, whether it's a hype or a fad. Well, it's a reality, in fact. Now, you see, even from the consumer trends, even, institutional investors, they actually put this as a condition for assessing, let's say, if they, long-term investment plans. Consumers are abandoning certain products because they feel they are, they are not responsible in that area. So I think it's becoming more and more a reality that comes slowly in act. Now, because I come from an energy sector, what I really like to see, I'm encouraged to see, companies now are talking and assessing their carbon footprints. You see, so you have companies that can have certain, let's say, renewables. They can have some pollutant that go in, but there is now a strong attempt to actually, and there are consultants, there are very specialized firms that can assess your carbon footprint, and based on that knowledge, you put a strategy on how you improve that over time. And I think this is, I've seen some very good examples of that. Now, in terms of environmental, there's a lot of conscious, decisions have been made to ensure that the environmental impact, especially when you're assessing a new project. The building codes now call for recyclable material that can be used. So I think there are quite a bit of moves in that direction. I think it will pick up, and the momentum will be more or less. It will become actually part of the fabric of any strategy development. So it's going to be a fundamental area that actually will be looked at in development of future strategy.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Khalid. That if you look at our poll results, it's very much, people are saying that from their business perspective, within the next 1 to 2 years, their organizations are looking at that. And I know we're a little over time and we just got a few minutes left, but Nuar or Abdul Qadir, any comments you want to make with respect to ESG and what you're seeing?
I echo Dr. Khalid's comments on ESG, but I would like to comment on something earlier that Abdul Qadir addressed. That was the involvement of engagement of auditors in innovation and all that. And I must say that while artificial intelligence and the use of innovations remains very important, God has blessed us all with great brains. So we should never give up using our brains. Common sense is perhaps the most valuable tool you have, and it's not used often enough. If I can share one brief example with you that I went through, in early 90s, KFC was bought by a business tycoon in the US, and you would probably, Brian, know who it was. And he had a problem. Some of the KFC units were making money and others were not. So he tried to do everything possible, but he could not identify the reasons. So he called EY to give him an answer, and his condition was, I'll give you 7 days. And if you convince me that you identified the right reasons, I'll pay you $1 million. So this is 91. So $1 million was sufficient amount of money. And if I don't accept your answer, then you get nothing. So 7 days, Jerry was the gentleman who was leading it, and the entire team did all kind of analysis, ran all computer programs we had. We could not identify the answer. So the 7th day, we almost given up, and Jerry has to go and drop his wife somewhere in the evening because the deadline was midnight. So his wife's comments while they're in the car that, Jerry, you're looking really miserable. What's the matter? He says, well, I'm about to lose $1 million. So that's why I'm so miserable. She said, why? So he explained to her that this is the problem and this is the conundrum, but we can't find the answer. And she said, well, that's very easy. He said, excuse me? She said, this KFC we've just passed, we are going home, and that KFC is on the wrong side of the highway. Who wants KFC for breakfast? So I bet you the reason is that these KFCs are on the wrong side of the road. So he took his wife back to the office, not home, and they put those on the map. 90% of the loss-making outlets were on the wrong side of the road. So they got the $1 million. So common sense remains relevant. For God's sake, use it.
That's some good comments. Abdul Qadir, any comments you want to make on ESG or in closing here?
Thanks a lot, Brian. I think no doubt we are always looking in the future. And I think countries, I'm talking about countries, I'm not talking about companies, who do not take the ESG very seriously. We know that, we are followers, but we can see that, a lot of anything that actually is being implemented, you need to make sure that the ESG is part of your implementation as a product. Not because you're looking at the environment only because that's what you're looking for and sustainability, but you're looking at it from the point that it's make good business sense. Because people will choose, and it's so easy for them to choose not to choose you if you're not in that line.
Yeah. No, those are great comments, and I think to wrap up, I'm going to pose one final question to each of you for some things. And I think from the comments that we have, resilience is something we talked about here, and I think the ability for all of us to be resilient, to adapt to change, to go forward. I like the comment you are, use your brain, right? And I would share the very first job I ever had as a young boy was working at a KFC. So I don't know if it was on the right side of the road or the wrong side of the road. But I do know the secret ingredients. So that may be another webinar. But I would offer to each of you just a brief comment of your perspective on resiliency as we go forward. And so maybe I'll go in reverse order. And this time, Abdul Qadir, I'll start with you, and then I'll go to Dr. Khalid and Nuar, and then I'll wrap us up.
I think being resilient is something that, it cannot be stated, it has to be tested. You can talk about it, it's not what you say, it's what you do. So I think this is resilience, it cannot be done unless it has been tested. So I'll stop at that comment.
Yeah, great perspective. Dr. Khalid?
Yeah, definitely I second that point. But I think, with resilience, it's like having the hardware and software. I think to me, the most fundamental influencer on resilience is really the people, culture, and attitude. It's the one that takes you through. The great things that happened, and we tested the resilience, tested ourselves during COVID. And I think we have to pay attention. We have to pay attention to people and people, let's say, feelings, emotions. After the aftershock of COVID-19 is still with us. I still, have my meetings on video conference. And I look forward to meeting people in person, but I don't know really that kind of. Many of the employees went through that shock, and that shock requires also some therapy. So I'm saying that in order for us to sustain, you also have to pay attention closer to people, and because they are the important part of having a resilient system.
Yeah, great perspective. Nuar.
Resilience is what sorts our men from boys and sorts our leaders from managers. And the last comment Dr. Khalid made is absolutely important. Your engagement with your people and people around your departments is extremely important. And the more resilient you are, the better chance you have of succeeding. The auditors aren't exactly popular. So you need to do something extra to really continue to add value and be recognized as people who are trying to add value to everything they do. Thank you.
Yeah, I think those are great closing comments, right? We need to walk the talk and do the testing as we heard, not just give it the lip service as people describe. It's a focus on people, right? I think the long-term implications, we know this has had an impact, and then focus on the value. So I want to thank our esteemed panelists. As I said to begin, we could have a very long MBA session with our esteemed audience with the perspectives they have, and it's my pleasure. And I'm very honored to be part of the panel and appreciate your time today. Just a couple of comments as we wrap up. I look forward to a day we can get back on the road. I think as a leader within our profession in the IIA as well, the last major event we had goes, in my mind, as a fantastic memory of being in the Middle East when many of us were in Dubai just a little less than 2 years ago. And that's the last major event we've really had as a profession. And so great memories. I look forward to seeing many of our friends, colleagues, and clients hopefully soon. If not, maybe by the time the World Cup begins in a year, and we can all break bread and be together with that. But again, thank you to my Protiviti colleagues, all of you as audience members, and I'll end by just say Ramadan Kareem. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Brian. Appreciate it.
Thank you, and bye-bye.